Welcome to Davos in the Desert. My name is David Wanetick. I'm the CEO of Davos in the Desert. Today's session is focused on animal health. I'm sure this is going to be a very informative program. I'm sure you're going to learn a lot about managing veterinarian practices, optimizing the performance of veterinary practices, as well as positioning those companies to sell. We'll also listen to some companies that produce medicine, veterinarian devices, software to run veterinary offices, and I think you'll enjoy those sessions as well. So I'm going to give you an overview of funding developments in animal health. So let me just share my screen. So hopefully you can see this. Okay, so this comes from Traction. They're a partner of ours. We're a client of theirs. They produce very good research on many different industries, but we'll learn a little bit about funding trends among animal health companies. Okay, so here, if you can see my mouse, these are some of the largest animal health companies. This report is pretty broad. It focuses on animal health in general. We'll see later that there's some specific business models that are addressed. In this report, implicitly, it discusses 2,700 companies. They say 662 of them have been funded over like the last 5 years. The other companies must have been funded at some point or their legacy businesses, but over the last 5 years or so, about $4.2 billion has been invested in animal health companies, these 662 companies. Over the last 2 years, 593 million has been invested. There's been 113 acquisitions. This is over a longer period of time. This is over at least 5 years. There's been 26 IPOs, but not very recently. Over here, we see that most of the animal health companies come from the United States, or more from the United States than anywhere else. And we also see the United Kingdom, India, Canada, and France have a good number of animal health companies as well. The lighter blue means these companies were recently funded over the last 5 years. The darker blue means the companies were established longer than 5 years ago. So here's the 2,740 companies that are included in this analysis. We said before 662 were funded. Out of those, 149 got to the A round or above. 161 received Series B funding or above, and 30 received Series C funding. 17 received Series D funding or above. Here are some of the largest rounds in the last couple of years. So the biggest round in the last 2 years was 76 million. That was a Series B raised by Loyal. What we have here in parentheses are the date of the founding of the company and the total amount invested. So 76 million for Loyal was invested in the last 2 years, but throughout its history, it has generated incoming investments of 136 million. Over here, we see the funding activity over the last 5 years. The blue bars are the amounts of money invested in animal health, and the yellow bar is the number of rounds. So I wouldn't focus on 2025 because we only have a month or two of data here, so that's not really relevant. But we see that the total amount of money going into animal health has stabilized over the last couple of years. It looks like 2021 and 2022 were outliers with significant amounts of investment in those years, and also an elevated number of investing rounds in those years. We see over here again the funding by country. We've seen these countries before, so the United States is by far and away the dominant investor in animal health companies. We see the top investors for different rounds. So if you're looking to raise a seed round, some of the institutions you may want to look to are here. These are some of the more active early stage investors, and these are some of the later stage investors. Here are some of the recent acquisitions. So the biggest acquisition was Welch Allen of $2 billion. And there haven't been any IPOs for a while, as we will see. But going back in history a bit, these are a couple of the successful IPOs and how much the company was valued at when they did go public. So this is something that we've seen before. Again, this is a funnel of how many companies have received what rounds of funding. And I think we explained that. We've seen this before, except this goes back a couple more years. This slide we saw a few minutes ago, I think, was only starting in 2020. Nevertheless, kind of summaries here. The amount of funding over the last 3 years has gone down 67% on average on a compounded annual growth rate basis. And over the last 5 years, funding has fallen by 40%. So we have a couple outliers here. You know, a lot of industries have some distortion here. But it does look like things have been relatively stable if you were to draw a line across this one and these two. Too early to tell what will happen in 2025. Here, we've seen some of these companies in this data before, but this list is a little bit longer here. So these are the companies that raised the most amounts of money over the last 2 years. Okay, so again, we see the United States is the most active player in funding animal health companies. We see the other companies here. I'm not so sure this is really that important, but it indicates the cities that are most active in funding animal health. Surprisingly, Portland, Oregon is very active, and Brooklyn, I wouldn't have guessed that. But anyway, this may give you some guidance as far as where to search for funding opportunities. This is a chart that shows us the first one over here is the amount of money invested in different rounds. So the light blue down here is the amount of money invested in seed animal health companies, and the medium color blue is the amount of money invested in early stage animal health companies, and the dark blue is the amount of money invested in late stage animal health companies. And these are the number of rounds. So as you would suspect, there's relatively few rounds at the later stages, the dark blue, but those companies raise more money. So we have the statistics broken down elsewhere, but you know, if you were simply to divide, let's see, 51.5 million by 3, it's about 16, 17 million, something like that. So a lot more money is going into the early stage rounds, but there's a lot of rounds there. I'm sorry, a lot of money is going into the seed rounds, but there's a lot of rounds, so not much money is being put into any particular seed investment. This is probably one of the most helpful slides, I think. This tells you over the years 2020 to the beginning of 2025, what have the ranges of seed investments, what have they been, Series A, B, and later stage? So for example, if we look at seed over the last 4 or 5 years, the smallest investments have been around 267,000 in a seed round. A bigger investment would be 3.3 million. The median is 772,000. So that's kind of interesting. And then we can go over here and see how the median rounds have changed as far as how much money is invested per round, per stage of investment. And let's just see this. So these numbers, basically less money is going into seed rounds. We had, again, maybe these are outlier years in 2021, 2022, but we see that the median amounts of money invested in seed companies is smaller than what it was. Um, Also, the trend here, well, this one has been holding up pretty well. Series A has been holding up pretty well. In 2024, which, we just came out of that, the amount of money invested in a Series A was 8.2 million, definitely better than the number in 2023 and better than even the outlier years. So Series A is holding up very well, it seems to be. And so on. You can take a look at this. Series B is also doing pretty well. It's 18.9 million. It's kind of, consistent with these numbers, not as good as 2023, but when we're looking at relatively small numbers in our data set, there can be some distortion, some outliers if one company did a very big Series B raise. So this one shows us some of the new companies that have raised capital in the last couple of years, and the number of new companies that have raised capital in the last couple of years in the animal health space. I'm not so sure this is really that important, but Traction breaks down the universities from which the founders have hailed that have funded these different animal health companies. I don't see a lot of value in that, but others may. This talks about the founder's previous employment history. Again, I don't find this terribly helpful, but we have it here. So this is more helpful, I believe. Top funding rounds in the last 24 months. So here, the company that raised the most amount of money, we saw this before. Loyal raised 76 million in March of 2024. That was their B round. And here are some of the investors that participated in that round: Bain Capital Ventures, First Round Capital, Colsha Ventures, and so on. So we have some data here for some of the largest fundraisings, and depending on which stage you're at, if you're at the later stages, these companies may be, these investors may be relevant for you to contact. Again, these are continuation on of some of the bigger capital raises, but it is interesting to see how much peers have raised and who their investors have been. That may give you some ideas for contacting different investor groups. This indicates the breakdown of new investors versus existing investors. So the bars on the top, the lighter blue, are first-time investors. So you see there's been a decrease in interest among first-time investors. The darker blue at the bottom is the existing investors. So there has been a decrease in existing investor activity as well. It seems like on average they've been doing like 40 or so deals a year, and last year was not a great year for that. But anyway, that's the data. These are some top institutional investors in the last 2 years. So I think we've seen some of these names in the previous slide. This is how many rounds they participated in animal health companies over the last 2 years. So this may give you some ideas who to contact. All right, so this is similar to what we've seen, but this one deals with seed investors. So we can see the different investor groups here, the countries from which they come, and how many investments they have in their portfolios in total, and then how many investments they've made in animal health companies. And here it indicates the different companies that these in particular investor groups invested in. The numbers in brackets are the total investments that the companies have raised, not the investments per round, or not necessarily the amount of investment that each of these investors invested in these various companies. So these numbers in brackets are the total investments. But what we see over here is that the most active seed investors in animal health, only look at animal health as a very small part of their portfolios. In many cases, the investments in animal health represents less than 1% of their portfolio companies. Um, okay, so these same idea here, but this one deals with early stage companies. And here we have the investor names of the early stage investors, the countries from which they come from, the overall number of companies they have in their portfolios, the number of animal health related investments they've made. And here is some of the companies that they've invested in. Um, and you can see here again the total amount that has been invested in those companies, not necessarily how much each of these investors have invested in them. Okay, so we get the same idea here. This is for later stage. I don't think I need to go into this because we understand how to read these charts now. For acquisitions, um, this is over some years, I think at least 5 years. There's been 113 acquisitions. The average funding that was raised before a company was acquired was about 35 million, and took about 10 years from the first funding for a company to achieve an acquisition, and then the average acquisition price was 459 million. There's pretty limited number of samples, so this number may not be all that revealing. We see some of the investors who have achieved getting their portfolio companies to be acquired here. Um, Here is the number of acquisitions. Um, okay, so number of acquisitions is held up pretty well here. Um, and then, but the values of the acquisitions are mostly less than $250 million. There's a couple of outliers at the very high side, but most of the activity is less than $250 million. Here we see some of the bigger acquisitions over some years, not last year, not the last 2 years, but over more years. In the parentheses is the date that the companies were founded, not necessarily when they were acquired. Okay, so we have more acquisitions here. Very, very hard to find acquisition prices. So in most cases, we don't have exit values. So the numbers that we do have can skew the ranges. And, I don't have a whole lot of confidence in the acquisition values being representative of what's really happening in the market. But we do get to understand which companies have been more active acquirers and how recently they've made their acquisitions. This is the same thing, just continued on, goes a little further back in history. And again, to reinforce the most active acquirers, we have the names here. Many of them are operating companies. Most of them, almost all of them, look to be operating companies. We have the countries from which they come, the number of acquisitions they've made. Again, not easy to get the actual exit values, but we do have some data points. And now we know which companies the acquirers acquired. Okay, these are a list of acqui-hires. So acqui-hires are when an acquirer is very attracted to the management team, to the founders, and they really want to acquire the people, but they do the acquisition as a company acquisition, but it's very clear that the employees will be retained with different earnout schemes, different bonuses, different vesting of stock. Anyway, so we see some of those acqui-hires here as well. That's what that is. And IPOs, there's not a whole lot going on with IPOs. There haven't been any IPOs as far as we can tell. since 2021. Um, but a statistic is that the average amount of funding raised before a company did an IPO was only 5.3 million. That doesn't seem right to me, but that seems to be too low, especially if the amount of money raised before a company got acquired was 35 million. Um, it seems like that $5 million number here is far too low. But anyway, that's what Traction produced. Um, and then this is the value of a company that gets acquired on average. Um, we have the names of the companies here that have been, I'm sorry, that have done IPOs. Names of the companies that have done IPOs are here. Um, so there's been a lot of activity of IPOs for less than 250 million, but again, not recently, going back 5 years or so. And here are some of the companies or investors that have invested in companies that have had IPOs. So again, we see the most recent IPO looks to be in June of 2021. So that's already about 4 years ago. And we do have some numbers for the IPO values. Okay, so this goes further back in history when different companies had IPOs, but that's kind of ancient history now. So that's I think the most important things we need to talk about for funding trends in animal health. Here are some research prepared by Traction. They have their own formulas and so forth and rate companies. And so the higher the rating, the more promising a company is supposed to be according to Traction. Um, they don't reveal everything that goes into their formula. But anyway, these are companies that they're attracted to. Some other companies. Again, we've seen things like this before. It's a call of the universities the founders have come from. Not so sure we need that. These companies are no longer in existence. So a lot of money's been raised, but these companies are dead. The interesting thing is, well, this is not the interesting thing, but what is happening here is the unicorns are companies that are valued between 250 million and 750 million. Let me just do one more thing. Okay, so this is a breakdown of the business model. So this is more helpful. So what you do here is you look to see what kind of business model you are pursuing, and then the data is more specific. So if you're involved in animal health supplements, there's been 2 rounds of investments in that field for $34 million. Here are some of the companies that received those fundings, the amount they received, the round that was involved. So this is more helpful, and then it gets broken down more. So let's see if we're in, I think, livestock pharmaceuticals. So here we have the taxonomy of livestock pharmaceuticals. We see how many companies are in this group, how many were funded, the total investments. The 7 of them are supposed to be valued between 250 and 750 million. These are, let me see. Yeah, these are some of the bigger companies in those different groups, and yeah, these are companies that receive funding in the different categories of animal health. We'll listen to Torgen in a minute. Maybe this is a good segue. But anyway, you can go back and do research and see who has invested in different companies. Maybe these give you ideas as far as who you should approach to find funders of your companies.